Hello, good morning. Welcome in Twitch, welcome in chat. How are we doing today? Doing a short, early coffee tasting stream and following along with James Hoffman, who I have queued up on my computer here. And yeah, so I don't really, we're going to be doing a cupping, which is the way you typically taste coffees. And so yeah, let's switch to this view here. And wait for this to start. Going along with that, I've got everything out here already. We've got 4 cups, 4 spoons, weighing scale. I've got hot water back here, and the coffee is still chilling in the freezer because he said to leave it in there until he said to pull it out. So no apron tonight, or today. I mean, it's morning still. Hey, Zeeks. Doing a coffee tasting. Hey, Miss Bat Lady. I'm not sure if this is actually going to be a live stream on his part or if this is going to be a video. I'm hoping it's a video. It doesn't really matter. I can probably, as long as he hasn't the VOD disabled, I can probably stop it and go through it. We have 4 coffees to try here, and we're going to be rating each of them on this card here between bitterness, acidity, and preference. So how are we all doing this morning? You having a good morning? I'm normally, as I do on stream, drip coffee with. I suggest people find a local roaster that they like. I think the best coffee you're going to get is locally, freshly, closely roasted coffee. And I'm not hardly hearing him. We're going to turn the music off here.
But you need pods. So go grab them if you have not got them yet. If they've been out for a while, that's totally fine. Don't stress about it. But get those pods. Now.
So I'm going to get off the pods.
Go. I'll be honest with you today. I do not stand a chance of keeping up with the live chat. And so there are some people monitoring the live chat. They're going to grab questions that when there's a kind of Q&A section or there's a moment or a pause, they're going to feed me some questions that I can answer. But hello to all of you. I wish I could respond to everyone, but I can't.
So I guess he is live.
Let me run you quickly through kind of how today is going to go. A little bit of housekeeping at the start. Make sure you've got everything that you need. And then we can get on and do some tasting. So yeah, I'll talk about this for a little bit. I would say maybe 10 minutes before we start to boil a kettle. Probably not even that, actually. Then we'll do a tasting, and that'll last a little while. And then after that, there'll be some time for some Q&A, and we'll wrap things up. So I would say we'll be done in not more than an hour. Depends how long Q&A goes on for. Depends how much energy I have for lots and lots of questions.
Are you able to hear him? I should turn that up.
Important stuff for today. The primary goal for today is for us all to have some fun. That's the number one goal. So this should be not too serious, but at the same time, the second goal is to do some citizen science and to do a taste test that we hope will yield some really interesting results. And I'm kind of excited about that. So that's definitely a key part of it. And then, of course, I hope it's a learning experience. Anytime you do a comparative tasting, I think it's a great chance to learn. And I hope you'll have fun doing a comparative tasting here with me. So, like I said, let's just run through the things you're going to need for today. Things nice and simple. Box of pods, at least one of each. If you're sharing your tasting, you're a very good person, and you might use both of them. You're going to need some water. Now, quick note on water. I'm using pretty much distilled water. If you're using distilled water too, that's amazing, because then we can have a pretty much identical experience, and that's very exciting. Soft filtered water is okay. If you only have really hard water or water that has quite a lot of bicarbonates in it, that will change the way the coffee tastes. And so it's up to you. You can always watch this later and grab some distilled and kind of watch this again tomorrow or another time if you really want the sort of most accurate experience. But soft water, low in bicarbonates, distilled is fine. I wouldn't regularly recommend using distilled water in a kettle, but in this one instance, I think it's okay, kind of useful. We're going to need something to melt into. Now, I'm going to use carafes today, mostly because I'm sharing my tasting too. So I'm going to melt into each of these carafes. I'm going to pour then into a cup for me. You could obviously just pour into an 8-ounce sort of sized mug or melt into there and taste from there too. That's totally okay.
This is about a 16. This is about a 14.
Need, ideally,
these are like 12s.
Spoon. It doesn't have to be fancy and purple. Mine are fancy and purple because I'm a fancy man. And I like a fancy purple spoon. But you don't need it can be a soup spoon, dessert spoon, it could be a coffee cupping spoon. If you have one, that would be great. In some situations, you might want 2 per person. We'll cover those, don't worry. Or you might want just like a little tasting cup. Again, if it's you're sharing a kind of tasting and you want to make it as sanitary as possible. I'll also be using a set of scales today. I am going to do my best to talk in both American and metric. So we're going to be working with sort of 8 ounces of water when we melt, or about 230 grams. But you could use a measuring cup in theory if you really needed to. But scales are good for not making mistakes. That's why I like them in the morning before I've had coffee. It helps me not make mistakes when I make coffee. And then lastly, you
volumetric
should have
measurements are
with the
inaccurate.
kit your little tasting card that I will also walk you through. That'll be nice. If you don't have this, there is a link in the description box that will take you to the website where you can download a PDF.
Not a
There should
serious
still be
baker
time
either.
to print 1 or 2 extra if you want. You might want to take notes on one, or if you mess it up and you want to do it again. So these useful. You will need one of these for later. And that, I think, covers the things you're going to need for today, pretty much. Let me double check I've got everything I need here. Now, just check. Yeah, I see comments on the metric thing. I'll do both. I'll try and do both. I promise.
Chat.
I'll do temperatures.
Which ones should I do with which colors here?
To 100 degrees Celsius or 212 Fahrenheit in a little bit.
Which
but there's just more stuff to talk about first.
For which mug?
Where am I? Right. So, we'll kind of cover sharing a tasting once we get to the sort of hot liquids bit, and it'll make a bit more sense. The one other thing that I really did want to talk about now is about the information that you'll submit. So once you fill this in, we'd like you to submit it through a link in the website that is again linked in the description. Now, we're not trying to collect proprietary information here. What we do want to do is share the information that we collect. So just know that your information will be anonymized. There'll be no personally identifying information attached to your data. And then there's extra questions that would make this so much more interesting if we could get the honest answers to them as well.
I'm going to say that one with that one.
Not everything's mandatory. You don't have to fill in that extra data, but it would be so interesting if you're willing to share it.
I'm going to call this orange.
The quality of research and just to understand what people like better, where people are in their coffee journey, what they're into,
go black,
what they're
gray
not into as well.
With the yellow.
Seems fair.
And
I hope
white
so.
with
So I hope you'll take the time to submit for each person that took part. It'll be so cool, and we will, as I said, anonymize and then open source the data at the end of it and share the
people that disagree with
that we learned. One last thing before we get to melting: if your pods are not yet sort of defrosted, you can sort of tell if a pod's ready when you shake it, and if it's still stuck to the inside, then what you can do, just run it very quickly under a tap, and it will just loosen off. And if you shake it and you can hear the sort of puck rattling around in there, then I think you're pretty much good to go. So
these are not
at this point
warm enough yet.
Yeah, I think at this point, I'm going to start my kettle going. I'm going to start heating up some water. I'm going to decant
have my kettle already
one of each of these
to 200
into each of my carafes. Now,
degrees.
if you're familiar with some of these roasters, don't let any preconceptions sneak in. Do you know what I mean? Like, you might have had coffee from these roasters, you might have had capsules from these roasters before, and you might have an expectation of how they're going to taste. I would say let go of those expectations. It'll catch you out if you carry them. So just go into this open-minded. I will remind you of the order as we go. They are sort of everywhere, so I don't think it'd be too tricky. They're on the scoring thing here. They're going to be in the kind of order here. I'll line them up and show you a top down when I'm done. That'll also be in the order. Be nice and be organized. Right. I feel like it's weird being in a room on my own talking to all of you. I keep waiting for someone to be like, okay, let's go. So I'm going to boil a kettle.
I know that feeling.
Off you go. And quickly run mine under a tap. Just so
I don't think I've had any of these specific brands. I've had, actually, maybe I have had Equator. Okay, I'm going to run these under some water.
That is the sound of a loose puck. So let me just do these quickly.
I'm sort of wondering, should he only use American coffee? Kappa?
Right.
I mean, I know Hawaii. But...
Hopefully, if there's some sound issues, they've gone away now. Apologies for those. You are going to listen to a kettle boil, though. In that time, I'm just going to have a little jump into the chat, see what's going on, check in for any questions that I might have missed at this stage.
So do I do them all at once? We're going to have to probably do them all at once. I feel like I'm going to end up wasting probably.
So I'm seeing questions boiling 212. Did I say 200?
The one I like the most.
100 degrees Celsius.
We'll see
boil
how
it.
this
Just boil it.
goes.
It's fine. I wouldn't stress too much about it. It can be just under if you need it to be. Because the coffee's brewed, it's just less of a concern when it comes to the impact on taste. So off the boil, it's kind of okay.
Well, he sold out 5,000 of these kits, and we've got like 4,200 watching them.
And one. Try and keep my my lids nice and neat for you. I'll just pop you in here.
So he went with the clutch first, right? Oh, he's doing all of them here. So I am going to follow his lead.
Lovely.
Lovely.
It's me again. Welcome back. So we're going to add 230 grams of water to the bowl when it's time to brew. I'll say that again as I pour it and the kettle's not going, but 8 ounces or 230 grams of water fresh off the boil for today.
Ah, it tore on me. I do have to say these are rather expensively packaged. I mean, metal, tin, semi-plastic.
Okay.
Okay, now is some
Are we still
music
getting
time.
clipping on here now, or just those of you having audio issues, can you tell me, has that fixed it? Are things sounding a little cleaner? This is wild.
Trying to not stain my cutting board here. My assumption is these are designed to work along the lines of a, K-cup or a pod, where it probably punctures the seal. And it doesn't. I turned them upside down here, but they all had indents in them, like they're designed to have a jet pump into them, and they wanted it to have a place to go to expand rather than...
Mixed bag of opinions on the sound. Very stressful for me, I have to tell you. I'm not sure what's causing it. If there's some sort of interruptions on the stream, we're on a pretty good network here. Okay, I'm going to get on with this. Hush now. And just add some water. 230.
So I guess this isn't a traditional cupping, by the way, chat.
What I will say is I will slurp very gently today, because that will definitely clip the audio if I do that wrong. So a day of gentle slurping, from me anyway.
I'm not planning to slurp. By the way, I didn't put a number on
Last
tonight's
one.
stream.
Lovely.
I just messed this up majorly. Oh well.
Get you out of the way, a bit more space.
I messed this
And
one
I'll
up.
just give these a little stir. Now, if you're way behind or you're way ahead in this process, no stress. We've got lots of time. Nothing's going to happen that's super important yet. I'm not really worried about one
And I
drop
have a
of
feeling I'm
cross-contamination
probably going to
between
be
the coffees
short
here.
on this one now. Yeah. And you get to hear my kettle now.
So there's quite a lot to talk about when it comes to kind of a guided tasting. And one of the really important things today is that I guide you, but I don't necessarily lead you from a tasting perspective. What I want to do is kind of help you break apart what you're
We're
tasting.
actually gonna.
But what's really important to me, and
I'm gonna
actually
give
really
this a
important to this
sip.
whole experiment, is that I don't try and convince you that what I like is right and what you like should be what I like. You know what I mean? Like, this is about your preference and
We're
understanding
gonna
your
start
preference,
over with that one.
and not about trying to get it to align with my preference. So I'm not really going to talk about any of my own preferences till right at the end, maybe. But that's kind of something I'm going to be kind of conscious of. And if you ever feel like I'm trying to get you to think something or prefer something, then I'm not, and you should ignore me. I'm doing it wrong. But that's a kind of key part of this. What we are going to do, though, is try to break apart the tasting experience into kind of component pieces, because when you do that, when you break it down into simpler pieces, this complex thing becomes much less frustrating. Because comparative tastings are great, but if you taste a bunch of stuff, you'll often have the experience of, well, yeah, this is different to that, and this is really different to that, and I might like this more than that, but I couldn't, easily communicate to you why it is the case. And understanding the kind of why, I think, is the really exciting and interesting bit of doing these kind of tastings. So what I'm going to do, just for me, is decant out a little bit of coffee for each one. I'll try and leave these in order. I'm going to share my tasting here, so I'm not going to have all the coffee. It's also 6 p.m. here in the UK, and so as I get older, I just have to be a little bit more careful about that sort of a thing, caffeine. I do enjoy some decaf and half calf in my life.
We're getting there, Chad. It's 160.
Have I just done that in totally the wrong order? I have, haven't I? I've just put this in the wrong place. Sorry. Losing my mind. I don't know why. I don't know why. That should be right. That should be, as we look top down, that should be the order in which we're tasting these, from A, B, C, and D on the end there. Good. Hope that's making sense. Going off the rails. I know. It's too. It's either too early or too late. I haven't had enough caffeine, or I've had too much. It could go either way. But there you go. There we go. Yeah, sorry about that. Just don't know what happened. There's too many things at once for a simple man like me. So just quickly, let's run
190.
through the sharing of tasting in terms of how it's going to work if you want to share with other people. There's a few ways you can do it. Obviously, if it's just you and you've got a mug of coffee, you can, if you want to, drink from the mug of coffee.
I'm going to be so
Let it cool down a
caffeinated
little
today.
bit more first. If not that, then the spoon. We will be slurping today, wherein you'll take a small amount of spoon on the coffee, very gently
I'm not a
aerate
slurper.
it as you begin to taste. It's a bit early to taste, so don't start tasting just yet. I'm just going to walk through the kind of process a little bit. That's the gentle slurp for today. We're not going to get the big slurps. The audio is stressing me out too much. Well, maybe towards the end we can have some slurps when it's all kind of coming good. If you are sharing with other people, there's the two-spoon
Almost
method,
there.
which I find to be insanely stressful, but it's for people who really, really, really want to slurp from a spoon. So you can decant spoon to spoon. This way, your tasting spoon never touches the liquid that you share with anyone else. You can slurp and you can have fun and do all of those things. What I think is kind of easier most of the time, just a little tasting cup. And that's kind of become more normal for me in my day-to-day life, where you can just have a little sample in the cup and have a nice time. Now, these are still a little bit hot, but I think we could gently start to kind of work our way through this. When you're scoring, your opinion during this tasting is going to change, right? And so what's going to happen is, I would say, think about your initial marks that you put on here as pencil marks, but as you get right towards the end and you kind of really lock in how you feel, treat those more as pen marks. It's going to be interesting to see how your scores change, whether you think things kind of go up or down in intensity on the different categories. But that's going to be really important. And in fact, I would say you want to have a kind of taste of each of these before you even think about making a note, right? Just to kind of get the lay of the land, understand what's out there.
Do I have to
Here,
slurp,
we just want to see what's going on. What's happening? What are the different flavors? Don't think too much about them. Just experience that there are some differences here. It's going to be some fun. And then when you've had a little taste of everything, which I'll do now, just to see where we are. Then I think we can start to work category by category. And this is really the sort of secret to tasting and tasting effectively, is that you're not trying to assess everything. You're going to break it down to one simple component. And I would say the first one is probably the first one on your card. It's kind of the easiest one, and that's going to be bitterness. Bitterness is, I think, a sensation a lot of us are familiar with in coffee. I used to hear people talk about specialties having no bitterness, which I think was probably a terrible lie. But you know, bitterness is present in all things coffee. You experience it, you detect it all over your mouth actually, but you tend to experience it more towards the back of the tongue in a weird sort of way, that sort of bite and bitter pain. Though it's not always
I sort
an
of think
unpleasant
of it as
sensation.
tongue
We have
pucker.
lots of bitter things that we really, really enjoy. Bitterness can be extremely complementary to other flavors and very enjoyable, or it can be very unpleasant to a lot of people. It's a very divisive kind of taste sensation. What I want you to do as you start is move from A to B and think, is this more or less bitter? B to C, is this more or less bitter? C to D, is this more or less bitter? Has it gone up? Has it gone
we're
down?
going to swap these around.
Start with that kind of an exercise. And then once you've understood that, then you can start to feel like, okay, well, then I think then one of these might be a lower bitterness. One of these might be quite high in bitterness for me, but don't ink it in yet. Just leave a little mark, because as you taste, as we go back, your opinions may well change. Have a little taste thinking about that.
I need a deeper spoon for this.
At this point, you're not trying to get flavors, you're not trying to get notes, nothing like that. Just focus on this one characteristic. Then the next one I want you to think about is acidity. And in the world of tasting, there's a phenomenon known as bitter-sour confusion, where a lot of people experience sourness in products they don't expect it to find it, or acidity, and they describe it as bitter. That kind of very unpleasant sourness to some people are like, oh, it's bitter, it must be bitter, where in fact it's a different sensation. Again, you detect sourness all over the tongue and in the mouth, but you'll experience it sort of along the sides of the tongue a little bit more. So it's that kind of sharp, pleasing, think crisp apple, think citrus fruits, acidity. That's kind of lights up the tongue along the side.
This is all sorts
That's what you're looking for. And again, as you move from one to the other, to the other, to the other,
and actually, quite honestly,
how is that characteristic changing?
Went from lowest.
Is it better? Is it worse?
Well, actually, no. This is sour. This is not bitter.
Now here on the score sheet, we're asking you to gauge the presence of acidity, not necessarily how much you like it. That will factor into preference down below, but we do want to sort of see how much you can, how much do you sort of perceive there? Is it high in acidity, whether you like it or not? Is it low in acidity, whether you like it or not? Or is it sitting somewhere kind of in the middle?
I'm actually going to go 3, 2, maybe 4. And then maybe even a 2 again. I don't know if I would do a 1 for any of those.
I've seen a few people ask, yes, this is going to be available afterwards to restream. If you're not tasting live and you want to taste later, you'll still be able to taste along with us as we go. To really forcibly rein in my slurps at this point. Okay. Now, what I want you to do,
I'm
these are
going through
already
for
starting to cool
acidity.
for me here. It's not the warmest here in the UK. If you're in a very hot place, it'll be a little slower. But if you go back to your initial assessments, take bitterness again, go back to what you thought you tasted and taste it again, because the coffees will change. And it's in part, I think there is some chemical shift happening in the coffees, but primarily the shift is in you, the taster. You're better at tasting things the cooler they are or the closer they are to body temperature. And so when things are very hot, you're not as good at tasting them. And as they get cooler and cooler, they get kind of easier to taste. And things like describing flavors within them do get easier and easier again. So again, it's not just go through bitterness once, make a judgment. Now that they've cooled down a little bit, go back and revisit your scores. We'll do this one more time before we wrap at the end. But I think it's really interesting to sort of look at what you decided it tasted like, and then now, does that match up? And it's okay and very normal if that's shifted a little bit during the tasting. Now, this is a relatively simple sort of score sheet. There are other attributes that I think it's extremely interesting to think about. And one of them, I'll say, is mouthfeel, texture. It's a difficult word. It's one of the more pretentious sounding words in tasting. I remember going to a tasting where they would talk about, is it like skim milk, 2% whole, does it have a different kind of mouthfeel? Is one richer, is one lighter? Again, you're trying to almost divorce the presence of mouthfeel. It's got a lot of texture, it's very heavy, from preference. You might like lighter, delicate things, and this has a lot of texture, and that's okay how you feel about it. It's just how do you feel these textures are different between the coffees? And I would say there's a good textural variation between them. And then we're going to talk about tasting notes, which is always the bit that I get the most stressed by in any tasting, because a lot of people get stressed by the idea of tasting notes. And I should explain most of the time what tasting notes really mean. They're kind of missing a really important phrase that should go right in front of them. So when someone tastes this or tastes a coffee, and take an imaginary
So
coffee,
here's what I
and
have
they
so
say, oh,
far,
it tastes
chat.
like blackberries. What the bit before that that's missing is that within coffee, it kind of reminds me of the taste of blackberries. It's not an explicit, flavor that you're going to find there as if it's an added flavor. You're kind of looking to contextualize the flavor. It might remind you of something fruity, and you can start there and be like, okay, it's something fruity. Is it something berry-like? Is it something red berry-like? And it's not going to taste exactly like a raspberry or a blackberry or a cranberry, but it will remind you of that thing. And that's what you're kind of chasing. And you can start at a very high level and be totally accurate and be like, it's kind of fruity, or it's kind of sweet and chocolatey, or it's a kind of very broad umbrella flavor. But you can then start to pick into it and be like, well, it kind of reminds me a little bit more of maybe pear than apple. And you might feel pretentious in that moment, but it's not. You're just trying to sort of feel around flavor to get where you need to go, to sort of say what it reminds you of. And what it reminds you of is going to be different
there's
to
several
what it
notes
reminds
that
me
I'm
of, because
noticing
we've lived
here
different lives and we've eaten different things.
that are
And there's
just,
no
some of them are
singular
classic. Like this
correct
one is
tasting
straight
note
up.
for any coffee. I think it's really important too. So as you start to taste these, you can just start to think about, oh, this reminds me of what, whatever it is. And that's where notes is really useful. And notes, you can mark down stuff around texture and mouthfeel. How does it leave your mouth feeling after you taste it? That's the finish. As you swallow and you sit there, what flavors linger? What feelings linger? These, I think, are really enjoyable characteristics. You'll often find coffee people talk about balance, which is a much more complex sort of term. And I think one where it's hard often to sort of do an effective sort of scoring of balance without having tasted a great deal of coffee with people. What you think is balanced, what I think is balanced, may not always marry up. And it's a kind of close to philosophical thing as much as anything else. Like whether you think something that might have lots of acidity and some sweetness and not much body, whether you feel that whole thing is balanced or not, may be different to whether I feel that's balanced or not. Generally, I would argue balance is sort of a little presence of everything without anything sticking out too much. It's listening to music and it's just sounding like music and the guitar isn't too loud. And when it's a bad mix, that's not balanced. And the same thing I think is true with coffee. Just going to keep tasting. And so at this point,
so this is a very classic light, weedy,
assess your scores and see again how they've changed.
Coffee. It's right in my wheelhouse. I like lighter coffees like that. It's typically not something that people love, though. I don't think it's a coffee that he loves. This is a straight up sour, fruity.
And then this is kind of interesting to me too. If you've been tasting in one order, I think that's really good and really useful.
Coffee.
Now I want you to go the other way and then kind of randomize it.
This is like
a lot of our sense of smell.
I'll enjoy this every once in a while thing, but this is not something I want to
be
drink
the benchmark
normally
for this
or regularly.
So going from this to this,
this is like
experience than going
a
from
special
this
coffee
to this,
or
this to
a
this,
different coffee sort of a thing.
So now
and you're going out
start
trying
to bounce around
nice
between the different coffees to see a kind of different form of contrast happening. It's really interesting.
These are more what I think of as more classic coffees. I'm not getting a whole lot of caramel or chocolate off of either of these. This is what I would think is a much more balanced coffee here. There are no specific notes that are pointing out that this is sort of like what I think of when it comes to wine. The higher end wines, you can't really place them, but they sort of work with everything.
Does oxidization change the taste? Generally, when you're tasting coffee, oxidization will happen, but incredibly slowly.
And Quater,
you will have a comfortable hour.
This is a fancy coffee house coffee.
If you start to heat them actively during that time and expose them to air, as you might do on a hot plate, then you tend to degrade them pretty quickly. But if you're just letting them cool, then they tend to taste great for a surprisingly long time, especially when you kind of go into kind of tasting mode and you're comparing and contrasting. So one more request on acidity versus
This is also
bitterness.
the one
that
I rated
question,
the
and
lowest.
it is one of the most frustrating aspects of tasting. Acidity, you tend to experience down the sides of your tongue. It kind of makes something feel juicy or crisp. People often use the word bright to describe coffees high in acidity, but it's a kind of experience down the side. It'll remind you of fruit in that way. It could be unripe fruit and sour. It could be nice ripe fruit that still has nice acids. Like, again, a great apple has a wonderful acidity and a really nice matching sweetness to it. So that's acidity. Bitterness, it is a harder experience to explain in that way, but you tend to experience it more at the back of the mouth and sometimes in the throat as well, almost like you feel it in your throat a little bit. It'll remind you of things like 100% chocolate, quite bitter, or tonic water. Those have that kind of slight bite to them almost of bitterness and experienced in a different place, and it should trigger a kind of different association to you. Ooh, a great question on what do people mean by clarity? I love this question. It's a really difficult question to answer, but it's a really good question. For me, you know how I talked about kind of finding your way from fruit to berries down to whatever sort of particular berry you might find, or whatever kind of citrus fruit you might find. The ease in which you can sort of see to a clear flavor, to me, is kind of clarity.
Yeah, this
is really great coffee. The flavors
sour,
are kind of separate, and you can
not my style. We can live without that in my life.
If you chose to, you can hear each instrument
that being the
playing.
black and white.
in a bad mix, things get kind of muddy and squashy, and you're like, I can't really clearly taste individual flavors very well here. It's a bit like I'm looking at an out of focus picture. I know
And
it's
it's
kind of some sort
very
of red
different
fruit,
from
but I
these
can't
three,
clearly see what it
especially
is.
after
And I think when you get more clarity in
been
coffee,
tasting them for a
it's
while.
almost easier to
This one has got
detect those
so
kind of
much
flavors.
sour, almost funk to it.
Is there a deadline to submit? Yes, I think the survey will close tomorrow evening so that we can get to work on the data analysis. There's going to be a lot of data to comb through, we hope, and very excited to see what comes of this. All right. Check back in. Some other questions.
Wow.
Will I use the data to design the perfect blend of coffee? It's a good question.
As it cools,
you're
is
in.
just
I don't know if that's possible. I think the thing that we're going to
so
discover
much
is
better
that
on
people
my
have
palate.
wildly varying
I'm enjoying
preferences,
it so much
and
more.
that's really interesting and important. And I think we probably have preconceptions about different groups and their preferences, and I'm not sure those are necessarily accurate.
I think this is my winner, Chet.
Really
I think the equator is going to be
think. We see what they buy
of a coffee that I would
and we
want
might
to
ask
drink
them
on a
something,
normal
but
basis
this,
out
I
of
think,
these
is kind
four.
of interesting as a
It's
totally different way to kind of
George
get
Howell
a
is a
preference
very
test out
close
of people.
second on that
Okay.
fact. I enjoy this. I would
Yes,
be
and
happily
all the data from the survey will be
this.
released. Once it's anonymized, it'll be tidied up
As it's
and made
cooling,
available open
I
source.
enjoyed
We'll
it
obviously share what we find
most
in
when
it,
it
but I'm
was
sure some very
piping
smart
hot
people will
straight
also
out,
find some
which is
fascinating
also
trends in there.
reminiscent of a light coffee.
So yes, this is not supposed to be
As
proprietary
it's cooling
data. This
down,
is
I don't
about
like it nearly as
us
much, and it's
collectively
getting
learning together. That's the bit that gets me very excited
much
about
sourer as it cools.
What does
It's
texture
between
feel
these
like?
two
That's
as
a
far
good
as like a
question.
normal coffee. And
it can be a bunch of different things, actually. If you think about, tea, as you're going to go from weak tea to strong tea, there's a real change in how that feels to drink. And the same thing is true with coffee. Interestingly here, the strength of all of these is pretty much identical, I would say, as in there's the same amount of dissolved soluble material in each of these things, but they don't all feel the same to drink in the mouth. Some of them might feel lighter and a bit more tea-like, and others will feel heavier and kind of rounder and fuller, almost like there's a creaminess to them. That's often a sort of sensation where it's not fatty in that way, but it has something that reminds you of something richer and fuller in the mouth. It's a great question.
As far as my local coffees, I can't stand Starbucks myself either.
Okay, how is everyone feeling?
If I'm stuck with it, I'll take their light roast.
Having had a good chance to assess these and begin to lock in some scores.
It's going to have to be pretty early in the morning to force me to want to do that. There is one local roaster here that does some nice dark roasts that I like. There is one local roaster here that does a light roast that I like, that I don't buy very often. I used to like mainline that stuff. I used to be like, and then again, I started cutting back a little bit on my caffeine.
The fun thing about those changes is that's mostly you. It's not really the coffee. It's mostly you, and I think that's just super cool. I think it's good to understand the limitations of us as humans.
Yeah,
and also
this is reminding me of all the weird ones that I tried with that company that was wanting me to sell their coffee when I was working in my business.
Now, I don't necessarily.
They had all sorts of very fruity, very light, very tea-like, very.
I will reveal in a second what everything is.
Not my thing. At the same time, very interesting, and it's fun for an experience. And it's not a flavor that like I can't stand it, but it's sort of like in the same category to me as like a sour beer.
But promise me,
like they're cool, they're interesting. I'll take one.
That once you've locked this in, you're not going to change it, and then we have the final preference questions on the back. Right? Don't forget these. These are really important. First question, between these three here, A, B, C, which was your favorite? Which do you prefer? You may choose one. And then we want to know between this one and this one, A and D, which was your preference? So 2 separate questions. Really, really
So
very excited to
I'm
know your
definitely going
thoughts
with the
about
equator
this.
for this one.
And if you're curious,
Like I said, this is a close
I
second.
could tell you what the coffees were, but you have to lock in your
And then
answers at this
between
point.
these
Because you're going to be
two,
tempted to change them.
which
Everyone
did I
always
prefer?
is. I don't know why, but it was just human nature. There's no
I
correct
think
answers
this is more
here,
of a question
but
of how they're aging
still,
at this point.
are you all locked in? Because I'll get the results out for you in a second if you are. Let's check the chat.
I'm going to go with
locked in.
A.
Great.
I'll repeat it. This is a very interesting coffee. This is very intriguing. It's not a daily drinker to me.
It's time to
this I could drink normally.
talk about the coffees then. Should we talk about the coffees? We start here at A little reveal. So this is roasted by Clatch. Lovely people at Clatch, the Perrys. Got to know Heather through barista competition. This coffee. Do you want a second to throw in your suggested origin, folks? Do you want to just have a little guess at this point?
No, it's probably going to be a web form entry, but this is for me to be able to do it
come
here.
To your origin for A.
Yeah, actually, there's a
some
web
people are
address
right.
here.
It's a really
He's doing this in partnership with Cometeer, which
I love seeing
is a
the
company
chat
that he's
with answers
involved
this
with.
is the greatest.
So this is a little bit of a sales pitch
Lots of you are
for
correct.
them too. So, but I don't plan on ordering their
from
coffee
Kenya.
normally.
It's a washed coffee. I think it's for me. It's a kind of clean, sweet fruit. It's quite high in acidity. It's not super blackcurranty, or that's always a tricky descriptor. In the UK, blackcurrants are really common, and how we experience a lot of black fruit as a child. We have a blackcurrant drink. I know blackcurrants are just not that common in the US, so I have to not use that descriptor. I think the descriptor they used, which was red apple for this, actually is a good description of the kind of acidity here. Different fruits have different kinds of acid. Obviously, fruits like citrus have citric acid. Things like apples have malic acid. And that has a nice kind of appley, sharp crispness to it that I really like. And I think the description of caramel in there is nice. It's a kind of balanced acidity-sweetness combo.
For the record, I didn't use distilled water with this.
My bitterness score would be pretty low here. My acidity score would be pretty high. Nice though. It's a pretty coffee, quite light in terms of texture.
Let's see.
I wouldn't go to tea-like, but I would go to almost. There's something fruit juice about it to me. I think that's the sort of bit that's pinging in my brain. It reminds me of kind of fruit juice more than tea, but it is, I think, an elegant,
pretty much
complex,
even across the board here, but it
there.
could be a little bit higher in the acidity.
Now, I can really trip you up in a second and say, do you want to guess the origin for B?
I really want to revisit all of these now that I look at these again.
Someone said A tasted better as it cooled down. This is a kind of classic coffee that kind of opens up as it cools down. It gets easier to pick apart the flavors in it. So B, lots of good guesses in here. Now, I've been a bit mean here. You get to be very right, a lot of you, because in fact, B is a blend. So B, George Howell, pioneering roaster, amazing coffee professional, hugely influential, just one of the most knowledgeable, fascinating people with an incredible company. Huge fan of George Howell. This is Alchemy, which is a blend of his. So it's a kind of interesting combo of washed and natural processed coffees. And for me, this was in the kind of browner flavor section.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of more of the chocolate, nuts. It's got some nice texture to it.
I wasn't able to pull out those flavors,
to me
but yeah, these are both in that
for me,
department.
The sort of shift in bitterness on this one was kind of notable, where quite hot, it had quite a strong bitterness for me, or I noticed the bitterness more. And as it cooled, that kind of faded away into a kind of very balanced cup, sweet, very enjoyable.
Sorry to hear that, Six. Yeah.
It's one of those kind of Moorish coffees.
We had a couple change hands.
Very chocolatey. To me, it's kind of the kind of Maillard section of browning reactions that turn things, make things very enjoyable to us. That for me hits those kind of notes. So I didn't tell you the blend.
This does not.
Oh, dear me. So there's 4 coffees in there.
So much to me, but this is
Brazil,
a
Costa
brown
Rica,
coffee.
El Salvador, and Ethiopia in there. So quite a complex blend.
Yeah, this is.
I think
this is probably
me,
a pricey
kind of
one,
classic, kind of medium
or a
roast
pricey
level,
coffee.
but just developed kind of sugars, nice mouthfeel. All right. Now C is interesting. Tell me about C. Have a little guess. C again, I will tell you now, is a blend.
I'm getting a lot of what he said there now. Yeah, it is.
Any guesses for C? Oh, I see some good answers here.
Like
so yeah, the Equator Coffee C. Any guesses as to
brown
what this
searing,
was?
like.
Have another taste.
One of them, I think, was a good changeover. One of them that was local to me switched hands. They do their own roasting in their own place.
Reveal.
Really small
C
roaster.
is a kind of classic blend executed really well. It's a Mocha Java blend. So it is Ethiopia and Sumatra. The Ethiopian coffee is a natural process coffee, and the Sumatran coffee is wet hulled, which is a really interesting process that has quite a distinct flavor to it. That is, I think, a kind of divisive flavor for some people. Do I need to explain wet hulling? Maybe I should. Usually what happens is that you would pick coffee fruit, squeeze the seeds out, and they'd be covered in a layer called parchment. And there might be something sticky on there that you might want to get rid of. Some sort of sticky fruit flesh, for want of a better term, often called mucilage. None of the words are good. The wash process breaks that down through some fermentation and then washes it away. In, say, a honey process, you might dry it down and then break the parchment away later.
Now that I've had like
wet
sips
hulling
of the
almost
actual
immediately
normal
takes away the parchment layer
sipping
around
the
the coffee,
coffee,
exposing the green bean, and it starts to sort of age and change its flavor quite distinctly.
I'm appreciating
it's
this
a really
one
traditional
more.
Practice in that part of the world, and it has quite a distinct flavor that I think is quite present here. Now, this is
they're both
I think
still good. This is just
the highest in bitterness on the table and a kind of
mellower.
classic dark roast. I didn't
This
get,
is a little bit more in your face.
Talking about acidity here. This
at this
for me
point
is a very low.
Have I completely flipped
coffee.
on everything at this point? I think I have.
Really light up that way. It makes it feel very heavy and very full and very rich, which I think a lot of people like. And that's two things. That's one, the roast level. So by roasting it darker, you do essentially react away the acids in coffee, and they become other sort of aroma compounds and other things.
Yeah.
And two, both of those coffees themselves, wet held coffees tend to be quite low in acidity. Natural coffees from Ethiopia can be up and down in acidity, but natural processes often do have a little less acidity compared to, say, certainly a washed coffee. So here, those kind of earthier tones to this, that kind of heaviness to it, mostly for me coming from the wet held coffee from Sumatra that's in there. Interesting. Now, D is from one single origin again. I look forward to your guesses in the chat.
I'm not sure, but I'm going to say Asian.
Oh, I love it. There are less correct guesses in this one, and I think we can talk about why. I think a lot of people have guessed Ethiopia for this one. It's not a coffee from Ethiopia. So Black and White Roasters, again, superb roasting company. I need to drink more of their coffees, actually. It's been hard to get their stuff in the UK, and I should fix that soon. Or should I go and visit? Probably, it would be nice. This coffee is an unusual coffee. So it's from Colombia, which is perhaps surprising because it has a lot of the kind of flavors you might associate with sort of natural process Ethiopians, because it is a natural process coffee. Now, I think it's anaerobically processed as a natural, which means that the whole cherries
this is straight up
were
like
dried, but they were also deprived
the
of
green
oxygen,
juice.
which
This is
changes the way
like,
that they would ferment as they dry. This, to
that
me,
wild coffee
is an interesting
you know,
variety that I'm still trying to get my head around, a churroso.
There's
Heard
very
some
much
competing
like
things,
green
whether it is an
apple,
Ethiopian landrace or
very
not, I'm not sure,
sour
but it's an
notes to
interesting and
this.
unusual
There's
variety.
some ferment,
Found mostly
almost
in
like notes
Antioquia.
to it
Is
in
that
my
right?
mind too.
Antioquia.
Reminded me
in Colombia,
almost a
where this farm is. This has a lot of
slight
those kind of classic
durianish funk
natural process flavors, like a
or
little bit tropical.
fermentation funk.
Lots of fruits, lots of dried fruits as well as ripe fruits. Really complex. Now this one, these tend to be a little bit divisive for some people. Some people really like the kind of fermented flavors these carry. They're kind of, complex, juicy. I will say for people who like a little splash of milk or cream in their coffee, these can be much more controversial or divisive styles of coffee to drink. But I think so interesting and so distinct and so unusual. What throws people here is like, well, okay, where's my acidity here? I get lots and lots of fruit, but does that mean there's lots and lots of acidity in the cup? And when you break it down, it's kind of interesting to kind of step back a little bit, but like, forget all the flavors, forget everything else, just focus on the acidity, balance between the two. That's when I think breaking these apart gets really interesting. Yeah, like lots of, I mean, it's a quite difficult coffee to describe, but also super easy to describe, because I feel like there's so much fruit quality to it that you could pick almost any kind of fruit word and you'd kind of be right. You know what I mean? Like it's tons of complexity in this. And then a really nice
Like
sort of
I said, very interesting
sweetness to
cup of coffee, but not a normal drinker for me. This is like coffee house experience coffee.
Yeah, there's people noting that this one really, again, this one changed a lot for me. Like the acidity changed a lot, the flavors changed a lot. It really kind of opened up as it cooled down.
These both
became kind of easier
a
to
lot
taste and kind
with
of pick
their
apart.
temperature.
And there was sort of more and more going on as it cooled down. Again, don't be afraid to bounce back and forwards between them now and focus on things like acidity again. Comparing these two is really interesting. Just between these two, backwards and forwards on that front, very enjoyable. All right.
Definitely
right. I'm
strong
on
questions
because we're getting on in terms of time.
Wheat cereal grain.
This is amazing. I'm so glad.
This one's much more.
We've had so much
like
fun.
This
I'm
one
loving seeing your opinions here in the chat.
Tastes like
I
a
can't kind of work it out. I will say,
this came
here
from the
have hooked
equator.
those of you up who are tasting and enjoying this thing. There's a link in the description. There's a discount code down there as well. You get $20 off if you want to taste something. Thank you to Cometeer. This has been a really fun experience for me. I'll try and catch a few questions.
This
just
is
quickly
also how I got the dry ice for that fun
sort of caught
experiment the other night.
This has
was
been a lot of fun.
These coffees were packed with
haven't
dry
disclosed
ice.
my favorite, and I'm torn. I have a preference for kind of fruit, and I'm sort of torn between A and D. I would find that question of which is my favorite a little bit harder. I'm not going to give you my answer.
I would choose between A and D. A all day long as a regular
How
coffee.
I compare these to normal brew methods?
This would be very exciting, like I said,
these
in
feel
like coffee house.
Close to filter coffee, like paper filtered coffee.
These two are getting closer and closer and closer to me.
I would say that's
the longer we sit here. And this one is becoming more attractive to me, and this one is becoming more not nearly as exciting.
Is it okay if none of the coffees feel like a 5? Absolutely fine. You know what I mean? You probably will have experienced more bitterness and more acidity, and it's okay for this to be your scale of things. If you're worrying about your scores now, please don't.
Yeah, I really didn't go to extremes on anything here.
Interesting that someone noted that they usually go for lighter roast, but C was their favorite. I think this is where kind of breaking apart flavor, you can discover some interesting things, and it might be the texture of this that kind of spoke to you, or it might be the flavors, it might be something else. It's really interesting. Ooh, should you pick if you were to go buy a coffee, should you buy one that you prefer warm or when cool? I mean, to some extent, this is a good question. I like this question. To some extent,
I'm just back and forth.
I would say pick the one you prefer cool. because I feel like as you get into
I think
enjoying
every
what
single
coffee can
time I
really
try one
offer,
of these two,
letting your coffee cool down that little bit
it's the
more,
one
and
that I
when you
like
want
better than the
to,
other one.
spending a little bit of time with it is very rewarding. It
It
doesn't
didn't
have to be
start
that.
out
You can
that
just
way. It
grab a cup
started
and
out
enjoy
very
it and go to
strongly
work, and coffee
in
can do that too.
Equator's
But
favor
coffees that
when they
are,
were
paying
straight
back
hot
for the little bit of attention you
as
invest in
they're
them, I think
cooled
are
or
always going
room
to be my
temperature
preference
or
because I think it just makes
slightly
coffee
above room temperature.
tons of fun.
This has
I'm seeing a
gotten
few
much more
super chats
exciting and
coming in.
been much more
I will
enjoyable
say,
coffee. This
any
has
super chat
been
donations will be
like,
donated to World Coffee Research,
I'm going to
who
keep
we've
drinking
traditionally
this, but
supported
it's not still
through these
exciting.
things. I'll match any
If you get what I
donations that
mean,
go in as well, just to add that pot up.
becomes the
Thank you to
routine.
everyone who is super chatting. I just want to make sure that that's where that money is going to go, not to me. I will match it. For preference score, I think it would be the easiest way I would summarize preference score is if I just asked you how much do you like it
You
on a
need
scale of 1
coffee
to 5.
recommendations?
Not
My
necessarily is this the
recommendation
most
is
interesting.
going
It's
to be
preference. It's which
remain
one
the
do you
same.
want to drink? Which one
Check
do
out your
you
local
prefer? It may not be
roasters
the most interesting and complex thing. I want
and
to know what
try a
you
whole
would
bunch of
want
different
to drink
coffees from your
if you
local
had the
roasters
choice
and find a
to do
favorite
so.
from one of your local guys. Because
thank you for lovely people donating.
Because you can
that will go to sort of the
buy
research into
a
the future
great
of coffee
coffee
in terms of
that was
from a
roasted
producer's point
a
of view,
far
making sure coffee is a
distance
viable crop
away
into
and
the
have it
future.
be
At some point, we'll do a video
like,
on the stuff that World Coffee Research
there's
is
so
doing.
much
I
of a
think it's really
game of
important.
coffee aging.
They're a great organization, and we have supported them in the past.
Typically,
We'll
what
continue
you
to
have
do so.
here in the States
Okay.
is you have roasters buying green beans.
I feel like there's
and they get those
some accurate
once,
descriptions here. 1
maybe
is you hate
twice
it,
a
5 is you
year.
love it, 3 you are indifferent.
Those green beans.
That's pretty fair.
And they will have to roast those green
it is
beans
kind of
over the
fine.
year.
It's kept as a
And
simple
they
scale
will be
to
aging
not overly
during that
complicate
year.
it. Just let us know which one you like.
It's a
As long
game
as
they're
the one
playing
that
the
you
whole
enjoyed
time.
the
So
most has the highest preference score.
it's
I think
very
we're
unlikely you
solid.
get the same coffee from the
Okay.
same person the same way from a local roaster compared to,
Is there
say,
a specific
a
reason for the
Starbucks or
selection of
something
these
like
coffees?
that can
Yes,
sit there
there
and
is. I
blend
don't know if I want to
so
tell
much
you.
stuff and
I know
have
you've all promised that
access
you've
to
locked in your
so
scores
many
and you want me
different
to change them.
sources that
In
they
the
can
follow-up
get
video that
a
I'll
very
make, when we look at the
similar
data, I'll explain how and why
profile
we chose
over and
these
over
ones
and over
and
again.
what questions we're ultimately asking or trying to ask in the kind of the data. So it's a good question. I'm sorry I'm not going to give you a fuller answer, but yes, this was quite intentional, and we thought about it for quite a long time and argued about what it should be and tasted a bunch of stuff.
And so
this was this.
Yeah, it's
all of you people saying thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who took time out of their day, came and tasted with us. These are really fun for me. They're also mildly terrifying, but they are really fun, and I hope you have a lot of fun doing them. I can, if you've got extra
I
capsules,
needed a little motivation
go
to
and
get
give this
going today
experience to
myself.
someone else. Like, go and share this. Comparative tastings can be so easy, and they're so much fun, and you can't get it wrong. Just tasting and comparing is just the easiest, most fun thing to do. So thank you. Thank you. Oh, you're going to make me broke again. I said this last time that I matched donations, and it really called me out. We'll still do it. I'm a man of my word. Okay. If you think about mixing the leftovers, don't do it. Yeah, blending is a complex thing, and yeah, I would say enjoy them individually rather than there. But we're going to get
So
some
yeah, I'm
really
probably going to end up.
results out of this.
I ended up
I'm
wasting
so
one of
excited to
these,
share all the data we collect with this,
which is sort of sad because it ended up being one of my favorites.
Some of you asked why Square Mile isn't in the lineup, because I'm not.
I'll probably end up drinking these two.
Here, and I think these coffees were perfect.
I don't know if I'm going to get around to this one.
Reason to choose them.
Like I said, this has got that ferment funk.
We're an hour in. I think we've caught every question.
I enjoyed trying it. I'd enjoy trying something similar to it again.
Ooh.
I don't know that I'm excited.
Thank you, everyone who's donating madly. I'll make sure that we also say how much we raised in the next video, so you know where your money's going. Appreciated very much.
And so let me go over these one last time.
I would say roast level on D is a similar roast level to the roast level on A. So it's on the lighter end of things. I wouldn't say it's an identical roast level, but I would say these are in a similar roast level.
I'm going to end up with that. I think we're going to end up.
Okay. I've had too much caffeine too. It's 7 o'clock in the evening for me now, so you know, that's going to be more of an intense experience for me going to sleep tonight. But I'm usually pretty wired after these things too anyway, caffeine aside. Okay. there's questions about Europe. I will say this now. I'd love to do this kind of preference testing in other geographies too in the future. This was a great opportunity to do it with the US. And I think what we get out of it's going to be super interesting. But yes, obviously, I'd love to do more of this kind of stuff. It's so much fun. It's so interesting. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up the stream here. Thank you, everyone who took part.
I'm not quite
You have been
wrapping up here
amazing.
myself.
I hope you had a lot of fun. Please submit your data. We'd really love to know a little bit more about you and what you thought of these coffees and your preferences therein. And then we'll be sharing this, all of the information that we get with this, with all of you, so you can learn more about the American preference for coffee. Okay, that's me. I think I'm done. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you for joining in with
Have
me.
a great day.
Here's what I ended up with here. I started off with the Clutch, and I still agree with these. This was pretty much middle of the road for a light coffee.
I'm James Hoffman, an author and coffee expert, and I'm here to answer your questions.
Okay. Ended up middle of the road there. Preference. I started off as a 3. I started pushing towards thinking it was going to be my favorite when it was still hot. Once it cooled down, it actually dropped down considerably in my list and ended up being essentially the same as, George was the most interesting to me over the whole tasting. It started off relatively easy to drink, not very high acidity or bitterness. I would say the acidity gained as it cooled, and its flavor it opened up. And so it went from what started off as really boring coffee house coffee to something that I enjoyed here towards the end. Equator was much rougher, but ended up being, and this ended up being my typical coffee house coffee in my mind, other than, Starbucks or Dunkin's, which are, they sort of have notes that I don't even associate with coffee that make them their coffee, you know what I mean? So, and then Black and White, this is just not my coffee. It's enjoyable. It's I've said this 3 or 4 times now, but coffee house coffee. For the experience, for I'm gonna try this single origin from this altitude that's that coffee. So thank you for joining with me on my extra morning stream here, as I followed along with James Hoffman for his tasting. I enjoyed hanging out with all of you. And I didn't number this stream, so this isn't part of the official. I might actually throw this up on YouTube a bit quicker than usual. And so back tomorrow. Gonna be doing Irish nachos, cooking tomorrow. Gonna be making my own potato chips. Well, not chips, but I don't know. I might try and do waffle fries. Can I do waffle fries with my thing? I don't know if I've got a wavy cut thing from my mandolin or not, but gonna be doing my own waffle cut fries maybe, or maybe just thick potato chip fries, nacho style. Gonna make my own cheese sauce and all that good stuff. I hope you come to join me for that. And have a great day, everyone. I'm not saying good night for once. I'm saying have a good day. So I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.